Welcome, everybody. It's good to see you here. I'm glad you're here. Very glad you're here. Yes. It'd get really boring if I had to do this all by myself. Yes. If you would remain standing, turn in your chant booklets to the Three Refuges. We'll begin with those. I go for refuge to Buddha, my deeply awakened mind, the living source of understanding and compassion, which must be cultivated to be known fully. I go for refuge to Dharma, the path of mindful living, leading to healing, joy, and enlightenment, the way of peace, which must be cultivated to be known fully. I go for refuge to Sangha, the loving and supportive community of practice, realizing harmony, awareness, and liberation, which must be cultivated to be known fully. I am aware that the three jewels are within my heart. I vow to realize them. I vow to understand living beings and their suffering. I vow to cultivate loving kindness and compassion and to practice joy and equanimity. I vow to live simply and sanely, content with few possessions, and to keep my body healthy. I vow to let go of worry and anxiety in order to be light and free. I am aware that I owe so much to my parents, teachers, friends, and all beings. I vow to be worthy of their trust, to practice wholeheartedly, so that understanding and compassion will flower, and I can help living beings be free from their suffering. May the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha support my efforts. May the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha support my efforts. May the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha support my efforts. And we bow. And then we'll turn to the Heart Sutra on the next page. The Maha Prajna Paramita Hridaya Sutra. The Bodhisattva of great compassion, from the deep practice of Prajna Paramita, perceived the emptiness of all five skandhas and delivered all beings from their suffering. O Shariputra, form is no other than emptiness, emptiness no other than form, form is emptiness, emptiness form. The same is true of feeling, thought, impulse, and consciousness. O Shariputra, all dharmas are empty. They are not born nor annihilated. They are not defiled nor immaculate. They do not increase nor decrease. So in emptiness, no form, no feeling, no thought, no impulse, no consciousness, no eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, no form, sound, smell, taste, touch, or objects of mind, no realm of sight, no realm of consciousness, no ignorance, nor extinction of ignorance, no old age and death, nor extinction of them, no suffering, no cause of suffering, no cease from suffering, no path to lead out of suffering, no knowledge, no attainment, no realization, for there is nothing to attain. The Bodhisattva holds on to nothing but prajna, paramita. Therefore the mind is clear of any delusive hindrance. Without hindrance there is no fear. Away from all perverted views, one reaches final nirvana. All Buddhas of past, present, and future, through faith in prajna, paramita, attain to the highest perfect enlightenment. Know then the prajna, paramita, is the great Dharani, the radiant peerless mantram, the utmost supreme mantram, which is capable of allaying all pain. This is true beyond all doubt. Proclaim now the highest wisdom, the prajna, paramita. Gate, kate, paragate, parasamgate, bodhisvaha. Gate, gate, paragate, parasamgate, bodhisvaha. Gate, gate, paragate, parasamgate, bodhisvaha. The Maha Prajna Paramita Hridaya Sutra. And we bow. You may be seated. The last phrase of the Heart Sutra, Gate, gate, paragate, parasamgate, bodhisvaha. The Heart Sutra talks about the way being beyond words. So loosely translated, that means gone, gone, far gone, way far begone, yoo-hoo! Okay? It's actually a celebration of the path being beyond words. I've always liked that. I didn't know that, but another Dharma teacher was explaining some parts of the Heart Sutra, and she said, now here's the translation of that. And I thought, right on! Yeah, right on. Excuse me. The Dharma talk for today is entitled The Imperative. Imperative. Think about that word for a moment. Must be. The imperative of the present moment. So as a culture, we have always been fixated, it seems, on the past and on the future. What's happened and what we think is going to happen, and that's where we focus our energies. Now, that's not always a bad thing, but it often gets in the way of the most important aspect of the three, this very present moment. Winston Churchill taught us, those who forget the past are condemned to repeat it. There is so much we can use as lessons as a result of where we all come from. For example, this is Black History Month. For generation after generation after generation, we have been fed misinformation about Black history. I mean, I didn't know until some years ago that there were Black descendants of Jefferson. He was the baby daddy to Black people. Wow. We've been fed misinformation about indigenous peoples' history. We've been fed misinformation about the American Indians, the original Americans. Did you ever think about that? Every one of us is a refugee. This was their country. The original Americans before it was ever known as America. Now, the realities are slowly rising to the surface as a result of very courageous people who will not be kept silent. And I applaud them. Yesterday on NPR, I was listening to a very extensive interview with a young African-American woman who had just published her first book, and it was about the three mothers of men who helped shape our nation. And they spent a lot of time talking about the mother of Martin Luther King. And I found it so fascinating because I'd never heard any of this stuff before. How many of you have ever heard about Martin Luther King Jr.'s mother? You hear a lot about his father. The original Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. Okay. But you don't hear much about his mother. And the things that she instilled in him, that led to the man he was. Now, accurate history may be painful at times to come to that realization of the role we, as those who hold the white privilege, held in Black history, in indigenous peoples' history, in the American Indian history. But denying it, denying the reality of the history, leads to the three poisons of Buddhism: ignorance, greed, and anger. Now back to the present moment. In last week's edition of Monk on the Move, which drops every Wednesday, except the week before, I scheduled it for Wednesday, but on my personal website it dropped on Tuesday. I apologize, Nate. Okay? But in the last edition of Monk on the Move that dropped this past Wednesday, I discussed my family's life as racing sailors. And we have a course when you're a racing sailor, and there was a time when Nate and I and my daughter, the youngest child, Chloe, raced on a boat called Windfeather, and that's when we did our first Cross Lake at night, Queen's Cup and Trip Cup races. Okay, and that was so much fun. Because when you're out there, you get to a certain point in the lake where you can't see this shore, you can't see that shore. You rely on your compass. So you've got your compass. On Monday night or Wednesday night races, you've got buoys set out. And the race director or the person on the committee boat, depending on different factors, will say, all right, we're going to make this many rounds. Okay, so we know that that's in front of us. We know the buoys. We have to go around. We have our crew. Okay? And they know their jobs. Nate owns a boat right now called Bainberry. He has a top-notch crew, and every person on that boat knows exactly what they're supposed to do when. All those things are in place before the race even starts. But there's one thing that is not within our control. And that one thing occurs each and every moment of the entire race. The wind. We don't know until each moment arises if we will have wind. I remember races, we were just sitting there and kayaks were paddling past us. I remember other races where we had to pull down parts of the sail because of gale force winds. We don't know if we'll have wind, how strong or weak it will be, in what direction it will be flowing from. It can start out coming out of the northwest, and by the end of the race, it's coming out of the southeast. We don't know until the very moment that it occurs. Every bit of that wind will be made apparent in that moment. Now, in the Heart Sutra, the Buddha tells us, do not pursue the past. Do not lose yourself in the future. The past no longer is. The future has not yet come. Looking deeply at life as it is in the very here and now, the practitioner dwells in stability and freedom. The Dharma master Chen Yang elaborates on this a bit. He says, the Buddha spoke about time in 3 periods: the past, the present, and the future. The notion of 3 periods of time can also be applied to lifetimes, past lives and future lives. When our body dies, our current life ends and it's become history. After that, we begin our future lives. This very moment in the here and now is all that we can be sure of. And when we combine all our lives together, our existence actually goes on for eons. Think about that for a minute. So we can either look at time as a moment that is tiny, or an eon, which is immense beyond our imagination. That can also be a moment. Now, I like to think of time in terms of the current moment. Regardless of the existence of past, present, and future, we can make a moment last forever when we hold on to the thought that arose in that moment. I shared with some of you that my father passed. We had a very complicated relationship. But my father was a very prolific writer from the time he was about 14. And he always wrote under a pseudonym, the pseudonym Dare Harris. Now, where he came up with that, I'll have no idea. But when I think of that name, I see this picture of my father that I have a copy of. He's sitting on his Harley in his black leather jacket, black pants, black boots, and those hats they used to wear, right? No helmets, hats, with a cigarette hanging out of his mouth. Now, every time I recall that, it brings back the moment. Even though I wasn't there to witness it, it reminds me. At his memorial service, they had on each table quite a few of his writings laid out, all with the pseudonym Dare Harris. And I have a collection of them that my sisters gave me. And when I take one and read one, in that moment, I am in that moment. And the letters that he wrote to my mother, in that moment, even before I was, I am in that moment. So taking into account the relentless flow of time, it's never stopped and it's never going to stop, coupled with the infinite potential within each moment. Buddhist teachings lead us to appreciate and to use each and every moment, if we choose, for our own spiritual cultivation. Again, from the Heart Sutra. We must be diligent today. To wait until tomorrow is too late. Death comes unexpectedly. How can we bargain with it? The sage who calls a person who dwells in mindfulness night and day, the one who knows the better way to live alone. Now, that does not refer to having a lone life or a lonely life, but rather a lone life here refers to living with sovereignty, independence over oneself. Having the freedom not to be dragged away by the thoughts of the past or the fear of the future. And even by our reactions to the circumstances of the very present moment. The Buddha taught, When someone studies and learns about the awakened one, the teachings, the awakened one refers actually to the Buddha, and then all of the Buddhas that came before him, and all of the Buddhas that came after him. Okay. All of you, as I've said before, have Buddha nature. It's already there. When you become mindful of it, you awaken it. When someone, and so Buddha basically means the awakened one. In fact, the Buddha was asked one time by someone in the crowd, "Are you a god?" He said, "No." "Then are you a prophet?" He said, "No." "Then what are you?" He answered with one word, "Awake." We all have that opportunity. I digress. I do that all the time. When someone studies and learns about the awakened one, the teachings of love and understanding, and the community that lives in harmony and awareness, the Sangha. When a person knows about the noble teachers and their teachings, practices these teachings, and does not think, "This body is myself, I am this body. These feelings are myself, I am these feelings. This perception is myself, I am this perception. This mental formation is myself, I am this mental formation. This consciousness is myself, I am this consciousness." When a person does not think that, then that person is not swept away by the present. That means we're not dragged into that past or fear of that future. And then lastly, from the Lokavipatti Sutra, the Buddha teaches, and this is very important, gain, loss, status, disgrace, praise, censure, pleasure, pain. These conditions among human beings are inconstant, impermanent, and subject to change. Knowing this, the wise person, mindful, ponders these changing conditions. Desirable things don't charm the mind. Undesirable things bring no resistance. His or her welcoming and rebelling are scattered, gone to their end, do not exist. Knowing the dustless, sorrowless state, he discerns rightly, has gone beyond becoming to the farther shore of enlightenment. If and when any of you decide to take the Bodhisattva vows, the book that we use, Becoming Bodhisattva by Pema Chodron, talks a lot about our ability as Bodhisattva to ferry people across to the other shore, which translates into to relieve sentient beings of their suffering, which will be all of us until we awaken. Knowing the dustless, it's like a pure mirror without a speck of dust. Sorrowless state, he discerns rightly, has gone beyond becoming to the other shore, the further shore of enlightenment. May you be well, may you be safe, and may you be at peace in this present moment. We're going to do something a little different today. It's time for questions. And Kim has a wireless mic, and because a complaint that I got was that people during watching the videos could not hear the questions being asked. So if you have a question, just raise your hand and Kim will deliver that to you, and you just hold it up and speak into it. It's just like the one I have right here. Okay, and that way we'll be able to hear the questions as well as the answers. Does anybody have questions about the Dharma talk today, the imperative of the present moment? Y'all don't be microphone shy here.
I just have a comment. It's very hard to do.
Okay.
Mine is not a question, it's just a comment that staying in the present moment is very hard to do.
It is. That's why it requires never-ending, abiding mindfulness. Now, you're absolutely right. It is a difficult thing to do even when you are mindful. I mean, how many times a day do we start getting dragged into the past, or we start thinking about what's going to happen next? That's a natural tendency that we as human sentient beings have. The trick is when we catch ourselves. Not that it's not going to happen, but when we catch ourselves, we draw ourselves back to the here and now. The here and now. When we begin a pattern of that, it becomes more and more natural to us, and we have to spend less and less time dragging ourselves out of the past or preventing ourselves from going into the future. So yes, I'm certainly not going to argue with that. It is a tall order, and it is a doable order. And the tendency will never ever go away as long as we are humans. Okay? It will not go away. It's what we do with it when it happens that makes the most difference. I'll go back to the Heart Sutra. The Buddha tells us, do not pursue the past, do not lose yourself in the future. The past no longer is, the future has not come yet. Look deeply at life as it is in the very here and now. Looking deeply at life as it is in the very here and now, the practitioner dwells in stability and freedom. He doesn't say anything about, you're just going to live in the present, and that's all there is to it. It's a no-brainer. Come on, guys, ladies, just be there. Eckhart Tolle wrote a book. I think he's the one that wrote the book, Be Here Now. Okay, fascinating book, and it's a good direction. It's a good direction to pursue, but it is in no way a certainty or easy to do. Any other thoughts, questions? Would you take that, Mike?
Being that you've just said that he's not saying you have to always be here, that we have to live and be real. How do you balance living now in the present with still looking forward to making plans for future? I mean, you can't just live here and not think. I mean, you got to know today if you've got clean clothes to wash tomorrow, to wear tomorrow.
Right. Yes. And that's why I use the analogy of the sailboat racing. Okay? It's not that we don't plan. It's not that we don't look into the future. The course is set. The buoys are anchored. The crew is ready. The boat is ready. Okay? But the wind is the unknown. So, yes, we don't look into the future. We don't not look into the future to plan, but we do that with the realization that a couple things could happen. One, we may drop dead right that second, or something else. We may get in those clean clothes and get in our car in the garage and it doesn't start. Throws our plans off. It's clinging. We get in trouble when we cling to this future that we have, that we're looking forward to, that we've planned on, and something happens. Then we get angry, or we get upset, or we're disappointed. Okay, and what good does that do for us? That's why in one of the sutras it said, when it doesn't go your way, I'm paraphrasing, then you won't be disappointed. You'll accept it for what it is. So acceptance, that was an excellent question. Thank you for asking it. It's the acceptance of this present moment and what our reaction, which is always our choice, is when the plan doesn't work out as we wanted it to. Do we let go? Or then do we become filled with rage or disappointment or irritation or those things that then, if we go in that direction, will take us down a negative path. It will generate negative karma. We will generate negative karma, and that will go with us. Once you set the wheel of karma in motion, it's a hard thing to stop. In either direction, if it's negative karma, or if you've generated a cycle of positive karma. But we generate the cycle of positive karma by accepting the present moment as it is, and then accepting the next moment as it is, and accepting the next moment as it is. There's an assignment I often give. I've had many classes come in, school classes, high school, college, come in. Usually they're taking a course on world religions or something, or they're studying it. My favorite class I ever taught was a group of 10, 11, and 12-year-olds in a Montessori school. Oh my gosh, these kids were such critical thinkers. They kept me on my toes. Okay, but I gave them an exercise. I said, I want you to look deeply into the palm of your hand. Just look deeply into the palm of your hand and tell me something. When was that hand born? Well, when I was born. Okay. Keep going. Back. Well, when I was conceived. Keep going. Back. When you look deeply into the palm of that hand, don't you also see the hand of your mother and your father and their mothers and fathers and aunts and uncles and cousins throughout the generations? My son Ari gave me such an interesting statistic the other day. I haven't done it mathematically because I'm not good at math. But he said, if you really seriously look at it, we only go back 25 to 30 generations before there was nothing. We as humans. Before there was nothing. I'm trying to think, well, if I go to my grandmother, okay, my great-grandmother were already back to the mid-1800s. If I go back to my great-great-great, we're back to the early late 1600s. Okay? So, now, I also then say, now, look into your hand. What do you see will be born from your hand? That one usually stumps them. But I see in my hand, coming out of my hand, my children and my grandchildren and their spouses and partners, all rising out of this, looking into my hands deeply. The same thing happens when we look into the present moment deeply. We become grounded. What happens when I get distracted by the past? What happens to my well-being?
Depends.
Nope. What happens when I focus too much on planning for the long-term future? Create suffering. Yes. Now, if I can have a goal, see the course, knowing that everything depends on the wind, then when the starting horn goes off, I can start. And each moment brings something different. Realizing that, accepting it, brings freedom, brings the ultimate freedom. Really good comments and questions. Any other questions?
What comes to mind is being present when you're communicating or talking with someone. When you're having a conversation, you're quickly formulating what your answer is going to be or how you're going to respond. Or you're thinking about something else. You know, you're thinking about, gosh, I got to get to the grocery store. We got to finish this conversation up. Mm-hmm. And really bringing yourself back to what that person is saying and being in that moment without formulating your answer right away.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'll give you a great example of that. Thank you. Thank you for that question. I was asked to speak at, once a month, they have a doctors and nurses luncheon at North Ottawa Hospital. And I was asked to come speak to that group of doctors and nurses about work-life balance. And the very first thing I told them was, I'm supposed to be here today to talk to you about work-life balance. I've only got one thing to say about it. Forget about it. You have not chosen a profession of balance. And I began to talk more and more about that. Now it's like a 45-minute presentation. So after 20 minutes I stopped. I said, okay, tell me, seriously, how many of you are still here right now? And they sort of looked, what? Or are you on to your next appointment, next meeting, next tea time, okay, next lunch, next going home? Are you already there? Because just looking at you, I can tell that probably 3/4 of you have already left the building, even though you're still seated here. But in communication, you raise such an excellent point. How many times have you tried to communicate with somebody and they're, yeah, well, yeah, okay, well, I gotta go. How many times? Yes. But when somebody lets you into their circle to have a conversation with you, that's where that be there now is so important. Treating them as though nothing is more important than being there and having that conversation with them in that moment. That's so important because we disengage so often right in the middle of something. We disengage.
I have a comment. I don't know that it's a question, but who has the mic?
Oh, right here, sorry.
I find that I get talked over a lot.
Ooh.
And it's been a problem with my kids, mainly. Anyway, it really makes me angry, but I don't know why, unless it's just that I'm soft-spoken. It's not that I demand to hold the conversation, it's just whenever I try to say things, they'll talk on top of me.
Yeah. That's especially true in corporate America. The old white men's corporate America. Women get talked over all the time. Yes, you do tend to be soft-spoken. But something tells me they don't have any hearing difficulties. They're not hard of hearing. They do know that you're talking.
Right, and in trying to change it, what I've learned over this past holiday season is I don't think I'll ever be able to change it. I've let them all know that I think it's disrespectful and to please not do it. But that's, my daughter came for a week after the New Year's, and we were all together every night, and it happened all the time.
There are some tools you can use. One of them's a 2x4. I wouldn't recommend that one. Okay. But when they start doing that, you might just look at them and say, "You're doing it." Very simple. You don't have to be upset or anything. You're doing it. Doing what? Mm-hmm. You're talking over me again. Was that your intention?
Good one.
Yeah. You're doing it. Something that simple. Yeah, you're doing it. All of us have habitual patterns. Some not so good, and we need to be reminded from time to time. You're doing it. I was in the store one time, Myers, with a partner. And it was always my job to push the cart. Okay? Push the cart. and they'd be filling the cart up, and I'd just be pushing the cart. And she looked at me and she said, "You're doing it again." "What?" "You're doing it again." "What is it I'm doing?" You've got your look on that face that says, "I hate this place, I hate shopping, I would rather be anywhere on the face of the earth than right here, right now."
I must look like that.
And when you come into the store and you take a cart, you set out with that face. And people around you know it. Haven't you ever noticed? They get distance from you, man.
Yeah.
Okay? Yeah. But just that reminder, sometimes it requires that outside person saying, "You're doing it. You're doing it." Okay, it's time for us to close. First of all, are there any announcements?
Well, I have our mala bracelets from Nicole that she made especially for the temple. You have them now, but I have them every week. They're $25, and then Nicole gives half back to the temple. So I have those here this week, and of course, we always welcome gifts to the temple.
Yes, we are a donation-based entity. It used to be in Japan and China especially, the monasteries were all government-sponsored and government-run. But that meant when those countries went to war, the monks could be conscripted. Okay, but here in the West, we go by donations we receive only. That's it. So we always appreciate your donations. And thank you ahead of time for anything you can give. Doesn't have to be a lot. Everything counts, as our treasurer will tell you. Yes. Please stand, and we will close with the closing Gathas. For all unskillful action ever committed by me since of old, on account of my beginningless greed, anger, and ignorance, born of my body, mouth, and thoughts, now I atone for them all. Vast is the robe of compassion, a formless field of benefaction. I wear the Buddha's teachings for the benefit of all sentient beings. All beings, one body, I vow to liberate. Endless blind passion, I vow to uproot. Dharma gates without number, I vow to penetrate. The great way of Buddha, I vow to attain. And we bow. Thank you all for being here.